Winter came early to the high country that year. Snow lay heavy across the grazing land, smoothing the hills into long, silent curves. Fence posts disappeared beneath white drifts. The cattle sheds stood half empty, doors creaking in the wind, their echoes carrying farther than they should have. At dawn, smoke rose alone from a single chimney, thin and stubborn against the pale sky. That chimney belonged to Noah Mitchell. Noah owned a small borderland ranch, the kind that barely made it onto maps and never into stories. It had been in his family once, back when there were more hands to work it and more voices around the table. Now it was just him. One man, one house, one routine repeated until the days blurred together. Loss had thinned his life the way winter thinned the land. He rose before light, fed the animals that remained, checked fences, repaired what the snow and wind broke overnight. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was usually to himself or to horses that already knew his moods. The ranch didn't ask questions. It didn't expect explanations. It didn't leave. Town was different. Town was noise and faces and conversations that started too quickly and ended with expectations. Noah avoided it when he could. He went in only for supplies, kept his head down, paid in cash, left before anyone could ask how he was doing. And he never stayed after dark. That night, he had broken every rule he'd made for himself. The truck idled outside a small wooden diner on the edge of town. Christmas lights were strung along the roofline, blinking red and green against the falling snow. Inside, warmth spilled through the windows in soft yellow squares. Laughter flickered behind the glass. Plates clinked. Music played low. Something about home and joy and things Noah no longer trusted. He sat behind the wheel, hands resting on his thighs, staring straight ahead. The wind howled across the parking lot, rocking the truck slightly. Snow rattled against the windshield like thrown gravel. Each gust made the diner look farther away than it was, as if the building might drift off without him. He thought about turning the key, just one movement, back onto the road. North, past the ridge, across the frozen creek, back to the ranch where the night would be quiet and predictable, where the only sound would be the wind and the old house settling into itself. Empty, but familiar. Earlier that day, he'd run into Caleb Rourke, an old acquaintance from town, the kind of man who talked with his whole body and never seemed to notice when someone wanted silence. "You can't live like a ghost forever, Noah," Caleb had said, clapping him on the shoulder too hard. "Just meet her. That's all. She's new around here. Lives not far from your place, actually. Name's Ava." Noah had tried to refuse. He always did. "I don't date," he'd said, simple, honest. Caleb had shrugged. "It's not a date. It's just supper. Be decent. Be polite. Then you can go back to hiding." Noah hadn't answered. Silence was easier than arguments. Before leaving, Caleb had added, almost as an afterthought, "She's had a rough start. Could use someone who knows how to mind his manners." That part had stuck. Now sitting in the truck, Noah replayed the moment over and over. He hadn't agreed because he wanted company. He hadn't agreed because he hoped for something better. He'd agreed because he didn't know how to break a promise once it was made. The diner door opened briefly, letting out a burst of warm air and light. A couple stepped outside, laughing, shoulders pressed together against the cold. They disappeared into the snow. Noah swallowed. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Lined face, weather-worn skin, eyes that had learned to look past people instead of at them. He looked like a man who belonged outside, not under string lights and small talk. The wind hit harder, rocking the truck again. He exhaled slowly, staying hurt, leaving hurt. One of them always did. Finally, he reached for his coat. The engine went quiet. The sudden silence felt louder than the storm. He opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching into fresh snow. Cold bit through his jeans immediately, sharp and honest. It felt real. It felt earned. He stood there for a moment, facing the diner. Then he started walking. Not because he believed the night would offer him something good, not because he expected change, but because running had taken more energy than he had left. Some doors, Noah thought, aren't opened by hope. Some are opened because a man gets too tired to keep walking away. The warmth inside the diner hit Noah all at once. It wasn't the gentle kind of warmth that eased into your bones. It was sudden, overwhelming, like stepping too close to a fire after being out in the cold too long. The smell of coffee, grease, and pine cleaner mixed in the air. Someone had gone heavy on the decorations. Red paper garlands drooped from the ceiling beams. A crooked wreath hung behind the counter. A small artificial tree blinked unevenly in the corner, one strand of lights already burned out. It wasn't beautiful, but it was trying. Christmas music hummed from an old speaker near the kitchen door, the kind of song that talked about homecomings and laughter and promises kept. It played softly, but not softly enough to ignore. Noah removed his coat and hung it on the back of the chair before sitting down. He chose a booth near the window, not because it was quieter, but because it gave him something to look at besides people. Snow pressed against the glass in uneven streaks, driven sideways by the wind. Around him, the diner was alive. A young couple sat 2 booths down, shoulders touching, heads bent close together as if the world might overhear them. Across the room, a family crowded around a table. Parents, grandparents, 2 children fighting over a packet of sugar. Someone laughed too loudly near the counter. Plates clinked. A waitress called out an order. Life went on in its careless, ordinary way. Noah felt like an object left behind. The waitress approached with a practiced smile, the kind meant to be polite without asking questions. "What can I get you, hun?" "Black coffee," Noah said. She poured it immediately, steam rising in pale curls. The mug was warm when she set it down, solid and familiar. He wrapped his hands around it out of habit, then let go. He didn't drink. He checked the clock above the kitchen door. 6:35. Caleb had said 6:30. Noah wasn't surprised. He sat back and let his gaze drift across the room, careful not to linger on anyone's face. People noticed when you looked too long. They asked things. He didn't want that. The coffee cooled untouched. He told himself he didn't care, that he hadn't expected anyone to show up, that this was exactly how these things usually went. Plans made lightly, broken easily, apologies delivered later, if at all. He'd learned a long time ago not to wait for people who didn't need him. Another song began, something about snow and miracles and being home for Christmas. Noah shifted slightly in the booth, jaw tightening. He wondered how many people in the room actually believed those words, and how many were pretending, because pretending was easier than admitting the season hurt. He thought of the ranch, of the quiet kitchen back home, the single chair pulled up to the table, of the way the wind slipped through cracks in the old walls no matter how often he tried to seal them, of evenings that stretched long and empty, broken only by chores he'd already done twice that day. That place was lonely, but it was honest. Here, everything felt borrowed. He checked the clock again. 6:45. Noah exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. This was the moment he usually left. The moment when hope, if there had been any, quietly packed itself up and went away. He imagined Caleb's voice later. She must have gotten held up. He imagined nodding, saying it was fine, because it always was. He reached for his coat, fingers brushing the rough fabric. Then he stopped. Not because he expected her to arrive, but because something in him resisted leaving too quickly. As if walking out now would confirm something he didn't want confirmed, that he was forgettable, that he was always the one people didn't choose when the road got hard. The wind slammed against the diner again, rattling the windows. Snow swirled thicker outside, swallowing the streetlights one by one. Noah watched it pile up. No one chooses the long road in weather like this, he thought, not for a stranger. The idea settled heavy in his chest, familiar and dull. He had lived with that truth for years. People chose comfort, warmth, what was easy. They didn't walk into storms unless they had somewhere certain to land. He wrapped his hands around the mug again, feeling its fading warmth, and waited. Not because he believed, but because leaving just yet felt like giving up one last inch of ground. The diner door exploded inward with a sound like a gunshot. Cold air tore through the room, sharp and violent, stealing breath and heat in a single sweep. Snow blew across the floor in a sudden white rush, scattering napkins and rattling menus. The Christmas music faltered, then seemed to shrink into the background, as if even it knew to step aside. Every conversation stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. A child went silent mid-laugh. Someone near the counter cursed softly as the wind slapped against their legs. For one suspended moment, the diner was nothing but breath, cold, and the howl of the storm forcing its way inside. Then she stepped through the door. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble forward dramatically. She simply crossed the threshold as if every step had already cost her more than she had to give. Her coat was soaked through, dark with melted snow, hanging heavy on her shoulders. Water dripped steadily from the hem, pooling at her feet. Her hair, long and dark, was plastered to her cheeks and neck, clumped with melting ice. Strands clung to her eyelashes, to the line of her jaw. Her lips were tinged blue. Her hands shook openly, fingers curling and uncurling as if she couldn't quite make them obey. She stood there for a second too long, swaying slightly, her body fighting to stay upright. Noah felt it before he understood it, a tightening in his chest, a sharp awareness that something had just shifted. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the wind, but the cold stayed. It lingered around her like a living thing. The warmth of the diner seemed to hesitate, unsure whether it could reach her in time. Someone finally moved. A waitress hurried forward with a startled look, mouth already opening to speak. But the woman lifted her head first. Her eyes scanned the room, quick, steady, alert, despite the way her knees threatened to give out. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't searching wildly. She was looking for one person. Her gaze landed on Noah. Not with relief, not with expectation, just recognition, as if she had already decided this was where she needed to be. She took one step toward his booth, then another. Each movement was careful, measured, as though the floor itself might betray her. Noah stood before he realized he'd moved. The coffee mug tipped slightly as his knee hit the table. He barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the way her shoulders trembled, on the way her jaw clenched to keep her teeth from chattering. She stopped in front of him. Up close, the cold on her was unmistakable. It radiated off her skin. Her cheeks were flushed raw, red against pale, weather-bitten flesh. Her breath came fast and shallow, each exhale fogging between them. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then she did. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was quiet, rough around the edges. Not dramatic, not apologetic in the way people were when they wanted forgiveness handed back to them. Just honest. "I didn't want to break my word. Sabar shanarm." The simplicity of it landed harder than anything else could have. No explanation followed. No excuse about the storm, the roads, the distance. She didn't gesture to her soaked coat or her shaking hands. She didn't ask if he'd been waiting long. She just stood there, swaying slightly, as if holding herself together took every ounce of strength she had left. Noah swallowed. "How far?" he asked, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. She blinked once, as if surprised by the question. Then she answered without hesitation. "Nearly 2 miles." A murmur rippled through the diner. Someone let out a low whistle. Another voice muttered, "In this weather?" She nodded faintly. That was all. No pride, no self-pity, just fact. The reality of it settled heavy in Noah's mind. The wind outside, the drifting snow swallowing the road, the way even he had hesitated to cross the parking lot. And this woman had walked through it, for a stranger, for a promise that hadn't even been hers to make. "Sit," Noah said, pulling the booth seat out. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "Please." She hesitated for half a second, pride maybe or caution, then allowed herself to sit. The moment she did, the tension drained from her posture, and she sagged slightly, elbows braced on the table to keep from folding in on herself. The waitress reappeared with a blanket, draping it over the woman's shoulders without asking. Another slid a mug of hot tea onto the table, steam rising thick and inviting. The woman wrapped her hands around it immediately, fingers trembling as the heat reached her skin. Her eyes closed for just a moment, and Noah saw it then. The exhaustion, bone deep and earned. She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "I'm Ava," she said. Noah nodded once. Noah. Outside, the storm raged on, uncaring and relentless. Inside, something quieter had begun. Something built not from words, but from the simple fact that she had come anyway. Ava did not speak right away. She sat with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, hands cupped around the mug as if it were something fragile. Steam curled up between her fingers, warming skin that had been stiff and pale moments ago. Her breathing slowed little by little, though the tremor in her hands hadn't fully left. Noah didn't rush her. He stayed where he was, one hand resting on the edge of the table, the other tucked into his coat pocket. He had learned long ago that some people needed space before they needed words. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp but steady, dark, watchful, not afraid, just careful. The kind of look that came from living where attention could mean survival. "You all right?" Noah asked. She nodded once. "I will be." Her voice was stronger now, though still low. She didn't thank him for the seat or the blanket. She didn't apologize again. She simply accepted what was offered, the way people did when they were used to relying on themselves. The diner had slowly returned to life around them. Conversations resumed in softer tones. Someone laughed again. The Christmas music picked up where it had left off, though it seemed farther away now, like something happening in another room. Noah studied her without staring. Up close, he could see that her clothes were simple. Worn boots, a heavy coat that had seen more seasons than fashion, a scarf tied tight at her throat. There was nothing decorative about her, nothing meant to impress. She noticed his glance and met it calmly. "You're not from town," Noah said. It wasn't a question. "No," she replied. "Recently arrived?" "Yes." That was all she offered, and somehow it was enough. After a pause, she added, "I'm Apache." She said it plainly, without challenge or defensiveness, as if stating the weather. Noah nodded, accepting it the same way. "I figured," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "How?" "The way you carry yourself," he answered. "Like you don't expect anything to be given." A faint expression crossed her face. Not quite a smile, not quite surprise. "I left my people not long ago," she said after a moment. "Needed space, different ground." Noah didn't ask why. He knew better than to press where ground was still tender. Outside, the wind hammered the diner walls again, a reminder of what she'd come through. He glanced toward the window. "That road isn't kind on a night like this," he said. She followed his gaze. "No." "Why walk it?" Ava took a slow sip of her drink before answering. "I don't have a car," she said, "and I didn't know anyone here well enough to ask." Noah absorbed that quietly. A stranger in a new land, no vehicle, no safety net. "You could have stayed home," he said. She set the mug down carefully, as if weighing the words before letting them go. "I could have," she agreed. "Then why didn't you?" Her fingers tightened briefly around the cup. "Because I said I would come," she said. "And where I come from, your word matters more than your comfort." Noah felt that settle somewhere deep. They spoke after that, but not the way people usually did on nights like this. There was no teasing, no measuring glances, no polite performances. They talked about the storm, how it came in fast this year, how the snow fell heavier on the north side of the ridge. Ava described the trail she'd taken, the way the wind cut across the open stretch near the creek, how her boots had soaked through halfway there. Noah listened closely, mapping the route in his head without meaning to. "You live far from the road?" he asked. She nodded. "A small place. Just finished putting it together before the snow." Alone, he thought. Like him. She didn't complain about the cold, didn't dramatize the walk. She spoke of it the way one spoke of necessary things, hard but done. Noah found himself watching the way she spoke, the pauses she allowed, the way she didn't fill silence just to avoid it, the way her eyes stayed alert, tracking the room without tension. He realized with quiet surprise that he wasn't noticing her face as much as her steadiness. Not her beauty, though there was strength in her features, shaped by weather and time, but the resolve beneath it, the kind that didn't announce itself. Most people who came through storms talked about it afterward. Ava simply arrived. Noah wrapped his fingers around his coffee mug at last, feeling the heat he'd ignored until now. Outside, the snow kept falling, relentless and indifferent. Inside the diner, between the hum of old music and the clink of dishes, he understood something he hadn't expected. He wasn't drawn to her because she was different. He was drawn to her because she endured, and did not ask the world to soften for her. The conversation slowed without either of them meaning it to. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because something subtle had shifted. the way air changes just before fresh snow settles. The diner felt quieter now, even though the plates still clinked and the music still played. It was as if the space between Noah and Ava had narrowed, not by intention, but by recognition. Noah took a sip of his coffee at last. It was lukewarm, bitter, grounding. "I don't come into town much," he said, more to explain himself than to make conversation. "Only when I have to. Supplies, feed, parts." Ava nodded. "I guessed as much. I run a small ranch," he went on, "north side of the creek, past the bend where the road starts to thin out." He said it casually, the way a man spoke of land he had long stopped thinking about in words. It was simply where he existed. Ava didn't respond right away. Her hands, still wrapped around the mug, went still. Her eyes lowered, not in shyness, but in calculation. Something passed across her face, a moment of inward measuring. Noah noticed the pause. Then she looked up. "Then," she said slowly, carefully, as if testing the shape of the thought aloud, "you're the one with smoke rising every morning by the line of pines." The words landed between them and stayed there. Noah blinked once. "What?" She held his gaze now, steady and searching. "Just past the ridge, north of the creek. There's a house there, old but kept. I see smoke from the chimney at dawn most days." A strange, quiet stillness settled over him. "That's my place," he said. Neither of them spoke. The moment stretched. Not awkward, not tense, just wide and full, like open land after snowfall. Ava leaned back slightly, the blanket slipping from one shoulder. "So you're my neighbor." Noah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Looks like it." They sat with that truth, letting it take shape. They had lived close enough to notice signs of each other's lives. Smoke in the morning, tracks in the snow, the quiet proof that someone else endured the same winters, yet never close enough to meet. Noah pictured the ridge from his porch, the dark line of trees standing guard against the wind. He'd noticed the new structure months ago, a small cabin rising where there had once been nothing but scrub and stone. He'd told himself it was none of his business. Now he saw it differently. "I saw the lights a few nights," he admitted. "Thought someone might have moved in. Didn't figure I'd be sharing the land with anyone new." Ava's mouth curved slightly. Not a smile exactly, but something softer. "I wondered who lived out there. Didn't see tracks often, just the smoke." Silence again. This one felt heavier. They had been close. Close enough to matter. Close enough to know, without knowing. Noah felt something stir in his chest. An unfamiliar mix of regret and inevitability. "All this time," he said quietly, "we were a short walk apart." Ava nodded. "But walking isn't the same as meeting." That was true too. Outside the diner window, the storm pressed on, snow swallowing the road that led back north. The path between their homes was buried now, indistinguishable beneath white and wind. Noah imagined her there, alone in a half-finished cabin, watching smoke rise from his chimney across the ridge. Imagined himself standing on his porch at dawn, never knowing who might be watching from the other side of the trees. Lives running parallel, never touching, until tonight. "I didn't think anyone else lived that far out," Ava said. "Not year-round." "I didn't think anyone would choose it," Noah replied. She met his eyes again. "Some of us don't choose easy ground." Noah understood that better than he cared to admit. He thought of all the mornings he'd lit the fire without thinking who might see, all the nights he'd shut the door against the wind, believing himself entirely alone. He had been wrong. They both had. The realization wasn't loud. It didn't crash or demand reaction. It simply settled into place, reshaping the meaning of what had come before. Fate hadn't dragged them together. Proximity hadn't been enough. It had taken a storm, a promise kept, a decision to step out of isolation and into warmth, even briefly. Noah looked at Ava, not as a stranger now, but as someone whose life had brushed against his long before words ever did. "Funny thing," he said, "we could have gone on like that for years." Ava nodded once, and never known. They sat there, neighbors who had lived side by side in silence, finally aware of how close they had come to never meeting at all. Sometimes, Noah realized, destiny didn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it waited patiently, just beyond the ridge, until someone was willing to walk toward it. They ordered supper without ceremony. Noah chose the stew. Ava asked for the same, then added cornbread when the waitress mentioned it was fresh. The plates arrived steaming, simple and filling, the kind of food made to carry a body through cold hours rather than impress a palate. They ate slowly, not because they were careful, but because there was no reason to rush. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady fall, snow thickening the dark. Inside, time loosened its grip. The diner thinned out as families paid their checks and couples bundled up for the drive home. Chairs scraped, doors opened and closed. Each departure left the room quieter than before. No promises were made. No one asked what tomorrow might look like. They talked between bites, letting silence do its work when words felt unnecessary. Noah spoke about the ranch, not as a point of pride, but as a fact of his days. He told her how winter stretched long up there, how the land demanded attention even when it gave little back, how mornings came early and nights arrived before he felt ready. Some winters, he said, feel like they don't end. They just teach you how to last. Ava listened without interruption. Her eyes stayed on him, steady and present, not drifting to the window or the room behind him. When he finished, she nodded once, as if recognizing the terrain he described. That kind of quiet, she said, can make a person strong or disappear. Noah didn't argue. He'd felt both outcomes press against him in different years. Ava spoke next, her voice low, measured. She talked about leaving her people, not in anger, not in shame, but with the calm clarity of someone who had weighed the cost and paid it. She spoke of the land she'd grown up on, of voices and fires and stories carried through generations, and of the moments she realized she no longer knew where she fit inside them. It wasn't exile, she said. No one pushed me out. I left because staying felt like pretending. Noah understood that too. I thought distance would help, she continued. New ground, new silence. But silence doesn't always mean belonging. She didn't ask him to fix it, didn't look for reassurance. She simply placed the truth between them and let it be. They ate, they listened. Noah noticed how easily she allowed pauses, how she didn't rush to fill space with explanations. He realized he felt no pressure to offer solutions, no need to soften his words. What he gave her was attention, and what she gave him was the same. Outside, the storm softened further, snow falling in a slow, patient curtain. Inside, the diner lights dimmed slightly as staff began their quiet routines. A broom swept somewhere near the kitchen. The music shifted to something instrumental, the lyrics gone. At some point, Noah became aware of how tired he was, not the bone-deep exhaustion of work, but a gentler fatigue, the kind that followed honest conversation. I should say this, he said, setting his spoon down. I'm not good at plans. Ava's mouth curved faintly. Neither am I. I don't know what comes next, he added. I don't even know what tonight is supposed to be. She met his gaze. It doesn't have to be anything. That was the first thing said all evening that felt like a gift. They sat there, plates empty now, mugs refilled once without either of them asking. The world outside remained harsh and cold, unchanged by the small warmth they shared. And yet something between them had shifted, not into certainty, but into ease. Noah realized he wasn't trying to impress her, wasn't guarding himself either. He was simply present, a state he hadn't known he missed until it returned. Ava leaned back slightly, blankets still draped around her shoulders, and looked toward the window. Where I come from, she said, we don't believe every story needs a happy ending. Some just need to be told truthfully. He nodded. That's enough most days. They didn't touch. They didn't lean closer. They didn't speak of staying or leaving. The night passed as it was, unclaimed, unpromised. And in that restraint, something rare took root. No one needed saving here. No one needed to be more than they were. They needed only this, to be heard without judgment, to be seen without demand, to share a meal and a stretch of quiet time without the weight of expectation pressing in. When the waitress finally brought the check, apologetic for the hour, Noah paid without comment. Ava didn't argue. They stood together, pulling on coats, the cold waiting patiently beyond the door. As they stepped outside, the air bit again, sharp and honest. Noah glanced at Ava, then back at the snow-covered street. "This land," he said quietly, "doesn't offer much." Ava adjusted her scarf and looked north, toward the unseen ridge. "It offers enough," she replied. They walked into the night side by side, not toward a future promised, but toward the simple truth that, for this one evening, neither of them had been alone. The storm returned with teeth. By the time Noah reached the ranch, the snow had thickened into something heavier, more deliberate. Wind tore across the open land, dragging white curtains over fences and swallowing the familiar lines of the road. The house greeted him with its usual quiet. Wood settling, the low whistle of air slipping through old seams. He hung his coat, fed the stove, went through motions that had steadied him for years. And still something felt wrong. He tried to tell himself it was nothing more than a long evening and a colder than usual wind, that Ava had walked out of the diner under her own strength, that she had spoken clearly, stood firmly, chosen her direction. But the unease stayed. Noah poured water into the kettle and stopped halfway through. His mind had already gone north, past the ridge, beyond the creek, toward the line of pines where a new cabin stood unfinished. He pictured the narrow trail she'd described, the stretch where the land opened and the wind had nowhere to break itself. He pictured snow erasing landmarks. A gust slammed into the house, rattling the window panes hard enough to make him flinch. He moved to the front window and peered out into the dark. The yard was already half lost, drifts piling against fence rails. Visibility shrank with each passing minute. He checked the clock. Too late for comfort. Too early to be sure. Noah paced once, then twice, boots thudding softly against the floor. He told himself she was capable, that she had made the walk into town and she could make it back, that this land taught its own lessons and she had clearly learned how to listen. Then another thought cut through the rest. She didn't know the ground the way he did. The realization hit him clean and sharp. Ava had described the path in pieces, not as someone who had walked it 100 times, but as someone who had learned it recently, in fragments. And she had said she knew no one here well enough to ask for help. No car, no family, no lights to guide her home once the storm thickened. Noah stopped pacing. This was an obligation. No one had asked him to do anything. He owed her nothing by the rules he'd lived by. But the thought of her alone in the dark, snow closing in, something unseen shifting beneath her feet, it lodged itself in his chest and refused to move. He grabbed his coat. The door opened with effort, wind pushing back hard as if warning him away. Snow blew inside, stinging his face. He pulled the collar up and stepped out anyway. The night swallowed him whole. He followed the path from memory, boots breaking through crusted drifts. Each step required attention now. The land had changed its shape under the storm. Familiar turns softened, edges erased. He moved slowly, scanning for anything that didn't belong. Tracks, a shadow, the faint suggestion of movement. The wind howled louder here, unbroken by trees. Snow lashed his cheeks, worked its way down his collar. He leaned into it, breathing steady, refusing to rush. Panic wasted energy. He knew that much. He reached the creek crossing and paused, listening. The water beneath the ice groaned softly, restless and hidden. He crossed carefully, testing each step before trusting it. Beyond the ridge, the world narrowed. Pines loomed dark and close, their branches heavy with snow. The trail twisted here, subtle bends that vanished if you weren't watching for them. Noah called out once, "Ava!" The wind carried his voice away, shredded it before it could travel. He walked farther, eyes aching from the strain of seeing nothing. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. He flexed them, kept moving. Then he saw it, a dark shape near the edge of the trail, half buried where the snow had drifted high. A scarf, dark fabric against white ground, nearly invisible unless you knew how to look. Noah's heart kicked hard. He moved faster now, careful not to slip, and found her crouched low, back against a fallen log, arms wrapped tight around herself. Snow clung to her hair, her shoulders, her lashes. She lifted her head when he approached, eyes widening just enough to register surprise. "You shouldn't have come," she said, voice thin but steady. He crouched in front of her, blocking the wind with his body. "You shouldn't be here alone." Ava tried to stand. Her legs didn't answer the first time. Noah reached out, not grabbing, just offering support. She took it without pride, rising slowly. "I lost the trail," she said, as if stating a minor inconvenience. The wind shifted. "I know," he replied. "It always does." They didn't argue. There was no time for that. Noah turned them back toward the ranch, guiding her step by step, placing his body where the wind hit hardest. They moved together now, slow and deliberate, breath matching breath. This wasn't rescue in the stories. There were no speeches, no declarations, just two people choosing motion over stillness. Ava had walked into the storm for a promise. Now Noah walked into it because he had decided, quietly without ceremony, that leaving her to it was no longer an option. The land tested them both, and together they answered. By the time they reached the edge of Noah's land, Ava was running on something thinner than strength. Her steps shortened, each one measured, as if the ground might give way beneath her at any moment. Snow clung to the hem of her coat, packed tight around her boots. Her breath came shallow now, no longer steady, fogging the air between them in uneven bursts. Noah noticed everything, but he didn't panic. Panic made mistakes. He slowed them further, adjusting his pace to hers, placing his body where the wind struck hardest. When her knee buckled slightly, he didn't grab her like a hero in a story. He simply shifted closer, shoulder to shoulder, letting her lean when she needed to. They crossed the final stretch in silence. The house emerged from the storm like a dark thought made solid. Low, weather-beaten, standing because it always had. Noah forced the door open against the wind and ushered her inside, shutting the storm out with a heavy thud that felt final. Warmth didn't greet them right away. The house was cold, the kind of cold that settled into walls and floors and waited. Noah moved without speaking, hands steady, motions practiced. He helped Ava out of her coat, hung it by the stove, then guided her to the chair closest to the hearth. "Sit," he said again. Not command, not plea. Just fact. She did. He stoked the fire, coaxing it awake with careful patience. Flames caught slowly, then stronger, crackling low. The room filled with the sound of life returning. Noah fetched blankets, thick and worn, and draped them around her shoulders. Ava didn't resist. She didn't apologize. She accepted the warmth the same way she had accepted the night, without ceremony. Her hands shook violently now. Noah knelt in front of her and rubbed them gently between his own, trying to bring blood back to fingers gone pale. Her skin was icy, unresponsive at first. He worked steadily, breathing evenly, grounding himself in the task. "You're safe," he said quietly, not as reassurance, but as truth. She nodded, eyes closed, trusting the words enough to let them pass. Noah stayed there until the shaking eased, until her breathing slowed, until the fire built into something dependable. He poured water into a pot and set it on the stove. When it warmed, he handed her a cup and waited as she sipped carefully, heat returning to her from the inside out. Hours passed like that, not marked by clocks, but by small changes. The color returning to her cheeks, the tension easing from her shoulders, the storm outside shifting from rage to persistence. Snow still fell, but the wind softened, tired of its own violence. Ava slept sitting up, head resting against the chair back, blankets pulled tight. Noah didn't move her. He sat nearby, watching the fire, listening to the old house breathe. He should have been exhausted. Instead, his mind stayed awake. He thought of all the nights he'd spent alone in this room, convinced that endurance was the same thing as living. He'd believed survival was enough, that if he kept his head down, did the work, stayed out of trouble, time would eventually reward him. But time hadn't rewarded him. It had simply passed. Watching Ava sleep, seeing the cost written plainly across her face, something in him shifted, not loudly, not all at once, just enough to matter. He realized he had spent years perfecting the art of getting through things, through loss, through winters, through days that asked nothing of him but continuation. And maybe that had kept him alive, but it hadn't made him present. The thought settled heavy and clear in his chest. "I've survived long enough," he admitted to himself. "It's time to live honestly, or not at all." Near dawn, Ava stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, alert even through exhaustion. She took in the room, the fire, the light bleeding faintly through the frost-laced window. Her gaze settled on Noah. "You didn't have to," she said softly. He shook his head. "I chose to." That seemed to satisfy her. Outside, the storm loosened its grip. Snow fell straight now, quiet and patient. The first hint of morning touched the horizon, pale and unsure. Noah rose and added another log to the fire. The flames caught easily this time. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't waiting for the night to end. He was staying, awake, aware, present, until morning arrived on its own. Morning arrived without ceremony. The storm loosened its hold sometime before sunrise, leaving the land hushed beneath a thick, uneven quilt of snow. Light crept slowly through the frost-veined windows, pale and cautious, as if unsure it was welcome yet. Ava was the first to rise. She moved quietly, mindful of the house and the man who had kept watch through the night. Her strength had returned enough to steady her steps, though the weariness still sat deep in her bones. She wrapped her coat around herself and stepped outside, breathing in the cold air with a measured calm. The ranch lay still, fences bowed under the weight of snow. A gate near the south line had collapsed, one post pulled loose by wind and drift. Ava studied it for a moment. Then she set to work. She found wire in the shed, her fingers stiff but sure as she cleared snow from the post and set it upright again. The work was slow, honest, the kind that didn't ask questions or require permission. When Noah stepped onto the porch, mug of coffee warming his hands, he stopped short. He watched her for a long moment without speaking. She hadn't asked if she could stay. She hadn't said thank you again. She hadn't explained herself. She had simply chosen to help. Noah didn't tell her to stop. He finished his coffee and fetched tools, setting them down near her without comment. They worked side by side, neither directing the other. The fence took shape again under their hands, crooked, imperfect, but standing. When the job was done, Ava brushed snow from her gloves and nodded once, as if marking the task complete. Inside the house, Noah added a second chair near the hearth. He didn't announce it, didn't make a show of rearranging the space. The chair simply appeared there, solid and unremarkable, facing the fire instead of away from it. Ava noticed. She said nothing. They ate breakfast together, eggs, bread, whatever was on hand. The meal passed quietly, punctuated only by the crackle of firewood and the sound of wind easing outside. There was no discussion of plans, no mention of how long she might stay or where she would go next. The questions hovered unspoken, then drifted away. Later, Ava returned to her cabin to gather a few things. She came back before dusk, carrying only what fit in her arms. Noah opened the door for her and stepped aside. That was all the invitation there was. Their days settled into a rhythm neither of them named. Ava repaired what winter damaged. She cleared snow, mended tools, learned the shape of the land through work rather than words. Noah kept to his routines, adjusting them without remark to account for another presence. 2 plates instead of 1, 2 chairs turned toward the fire at night. They did not define what was happening. They did not promise anything beyond the next necessary task. In the evenings, they sat near the hearth, boots drying, hands wrapped around tin mugs. Sometimes they spoke about weather, about work, about small observations that didn't require deeper meaning. Other times they let silence stretch, companionable and unforced. No one asked who they were to each other. No one tried to name it. Winter pressed on as it always did. Snow piled high along the fences. Days shortened, light retreating early. The land remained unforgiving, demanding attention without gratitude. They met its demands together. Ava never claimed the ranch as hers. Noah never asked her to, yet she stayed. And he made room, not just in the house, but in the quiet places he had long guarded. They shared no vows, no declarations spoken aloud, no future sketched in hopeful lines. What they shared was simpler and harder to undo. A winter born side by side, work done without keeping score, a fire tended until it held through the night. In a land that offered no guarantees, they chose presence over certainty and found that for now, it was enough. The season did not soften for them. But neither did they face it alone. Spring came late that year. It did not arrive with green bursts or sudden warmth. It crept in cautiously, as if unsure the land would accept it. Snow lingered in the shadows of fence posts. Ice still clung to the creek banks each morning. The ground softened slowly, reluctantly, releasing its grip 1 inch at a time. The ranch remained what it had always been, unyielding, demanding, indifferent to hope. Noah rose before dawn as he always had. He fed what livestock remained, checked the fences that winter had bent but not broken, repaired what the thaw revealed. His movements were steady, unhurried, shaped by years of work that asked for consistency more than strength. He was still a quiet man. He still spoke only when words mattered. That had not changed. Ava moved through the land differently. She carried herself with the same grounded presence she had arrived with, observant, deliberate, unclaimed. She rose with the sun some mornings, later on others, listening to her own rhythm rather than the ranch's demands alone. When she worked fully. When she rested, she did so without apology. She remained Apache. She kept her ways, her silences, her private rituals of grounding herself to the earth. She braided her hair each morning with care. She spoke of her people when she chose to, not as memory but as living truth. She did not shed herself to fit the land, and the land did not ask her to. They lived alongside one another, not fused, not separate. The house held space for both without claiming either. 2 chairs remained by the hearth, worn smooth by use. 2 sets of boots rested near the door, dusted with the same soil, carrying different histories. They did not speak of what they were building. They built anyway. Some evenings, Noah sat on the porch while Ava worked leather by the fading light. Other nights, they shared supper quietly, the day's labor settling into their bones. Words passed between them without urgency. Observations about weather, about repairs that would need attention come summer, about the creek's rising voice as ice loosened upstream. Sometimes there were no words at all. Silence did not press in the way it once had. It simply existed, room enough for breath, for thought, for presence. The land tested them still. A late frost killed early shoots. A fence gave way after heavy rain. Supplies ran thin more than once. There were no miracles here, no transformation of hardship into ease. But there was continuity. And continuity, Noah had learned, was its own form of mercy. He found himself pausing more often now, not out of exhaustion, but awareness. Watching Ava work, listening to the wind move through the pines, noticing how the ranch no longer felt like something he endured. It felt inhabited. Ava, for her part, did not speak of staying forever. She did not speak of leaving either. Her presence was not anchored by promise, but by choice renewed each day. She had learned long ago that belonging did not require permanence, only honesty. They never marked the day she moved fully into the house. It happened quietly, piece by piece, until the distinction no longer mattered. One evening, as dust settled soft and gray over the land, Noah stood near the fence line, watching Ava walk back from the creek, hands damp, sleeves rolled. The air smelled of thawed earth and cold water. "This place," he said without looking at her, "it doesn't offer much." Ava stopped beside him, following his gaze across the open ground. "It offers enough," she replied. They stood there together, neither reaching for the other, neither stepping away. The land did not promise safety. It did not promise reward. It promised only what it always had: work, endurance, and long seasons that asked difficult questions. And yet, it was no longer empty. As night gathered and the first stars emerged, a question settled between them, unspoken but present all the same. Was staying an act of courage, or was leaving the truer form of survival? No answer came. Perhaps it never would. But as the light faded and the house behind them held steady, warm, and lived in, one truth remained clear. There was no promise of heaven here, no guarantee of what lay ahead. Only this: the land still stood harsh and wide, but neither of them faced it alone anymore. And for now, that was enough.